Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram. Thank you for joining me for the next hour. Let me start by apologizing. There were some scheduling issues, as a result of which we're starting roughly 40 minutes late. Thank you for your patience and staying up with us. We hope we can make it worthwhile. And as I say, I have the privilege of having on the program this evening Mr. Sherwin Holer. He's an engineer by profession. He's the chairman of the PNCR. And Mr. Elson Lowe, an economist by profession and a member of parliament. Gentlemen.
Not quite.
Not quite. Oh, you're not a member of parliament.
No, he's a member of parliament.
I'm sorry.
Easy mistake to make.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Shows how new it is for me to meet these persons. But you're an economist.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're going to bring a good perspective to this budget. Gentlemen, the budget presented by Minister Ashley Singh was by far the largest budget ever presented in Guyana. Whether you're speaking of absolute amount or you're speaking on a year-on-year growth, it is really mind-boggling, the size of the budget. Another feature of this budget is how it is moving away from a current budget, current expenditure, and it's now heavily weighted in favor of capital expenditure. Whereas in 2021, the current expenditure to capital expenditure was 263%. In 2022, it's going to be less than 140%. And that shows you the direction in which we're going. Anyway, let me ask you to tell our viewers your initial reaction to this budget. You've been in Parliament, there's been some debate, there's been a lot written about the budget. We'll talk about the budget process and so on. But what's your initial reaction? And maybe, Sherwin, as chairman of the party and also member of Parliament, you'll be sitting in the National Assembly. Give me your impression.
Thank you, Mr. Christopher Ram, and good night to all of our viewers. Look, it is very clear to me that while it's the biggest budget, it does not attack the essential areas where we expected it to, the government to put money into. Let me speak specifically on the issue of the single parents, the poor. We expected it to go into communities, vulnerable communities, and those groupings of persons that are vulnerable, considered as vulnerable. And so I don't think there is much focus on those vulnerable groups and the poor. And so that is one of our greatest disappointment with the budget, being the biggest budget, the first oil budget of this country. $126 billion being pumped from the Natural Resource Fund into the budget, and it's a great disappointment to see so little for the poor and vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks first of all for having us here, Chris. It's good to be on. So what I would say is, budgets in Guyana expand every year. Every year is the biggest budget. But as you're mentioning, this one is substantially larger than in terms of the percentage change than previous budgets. You see, a 10 to 15% change in budgets as over year. But this one is about 4 to 5% larger. So it's around 3 times as big of an advance, which is why I think we're noticing it. And it's very interesting that in an environment where we're seeing a lot of inflation, prices are gone through the roof, a lot of poor people on the ground are really struggling. We're seeing a massive expansion of the budget. And, economists that I speak to, we agree that it is likely to have an inflationary effect. It's likely to continue to send prices up. as much as there are other factors that are likely to continue to send prices up. So that, I think, gives you the sense that it is a big budget, there's a lot going on, but it isn't necessarily in the interests of everyone, and in fact it may actually make certain people worse off by prolonging or amplifying some of the cost of living difficulties that come from prices being so much higher and prices being higher for a longer period of time.
It's interesting, Elson, that you've zoned into the question of cost of living and prices.
Sure.
The inflation rate, based on the statistics out of the Statistical Bureau, is that the inflation is 5.7%. Give me your thoughts on that number.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be, the highest inflation rate I think we've had in about 10 years. I think it was about 2% or so.
You're accepting it as
Inflation.
accurate?
Well, what I would say is this. I think that at the tail end of the year, you saw a substantial jump in inflation, and estimates across the world were beating the economists' estimates. So I think that number will likely have to be revised up. But even without being revised up, it's the highest inflation for a prolonged period of time. But it was concentrated, and you saw this over the course of the year, in certain areas, such as food items and so on. And what we as economists would say is that when it comes to inflation, we call it a tax on the poor, because it is poor people who are least in a position to defend themselves from these price increases. They don't have assets or businesses to help to cushion them. So that's why, as my colleague was alluding to, we have our focus really is on the average man who is suffering, and some of the things that we've put forward are as far as increasing the tax threshold and so on. It's really with a mind towards cushioning the effect on the people that we know to be vulnerable to these particular circumstances.
I'll just pursue this question of the inflation. The inflation is actually projected in 2022 to be just 4.1%, which is to come down. And I see Ramon McCrae, their publication, has said the 2021 year reported period-on-period inflation at 5.6% and projected a full year inflation rate of 3.8% against 5.7%. And even the 5.6%,
5.7, I think it's
5.7%. If you look at the highest single component,
Sure.
it was in food.
Yeah.
Now, and we know who spend the bulk of their money on food.
Yeah. That's where I wanted to make a point. The government is, they're putting it that, the entire world has inflation, and so we should just accept it. But if you look at the United States, for example, they're looking at ways how they can deal with inflation currently. So I don't know why this government thinks that it's okay to just say, well, the world has inflation at this point, and it's acceptable. And that is why, Mr. Ram, you would think that there would be a heavy investment in agriculture, for example, in food,
Yes.
in cash crops and etc. And those are the areas where the poor are struggling with. The cost of basic, vegetables, fruits and vegetables is one of the things that people are complaining about. And so one would have thought that a significant sums would have been invested in those areas, in agriculture especially. But we're not seeing that. We know that the floods, they're claiming that, and everything is about the flood at this point, the floods of 2021, so they continue to blame it in 2022, blame whatever is happening on the floods. But again, we do not see any major or any new policy to deal with the floods, to increase our drainage capacity, to handle that kind of volume.
Well, there's a lot of money, in capital money, in dealing with infrastructure, though, isn't it? Which includes defenses, sea defenses.
Well, I questioned. I am the chair for the Economic Services Committee,
Right.
and I had the agriculture minister before that committee just a few weeks ago, and I drilled in on this same point to tell us, I wanted to know if the amount of water the current drainage network could handle, and what steps they're taking to, improve it, because we know in 2021 we had the worst flood, so to speak. And you would think, other than the routine, what I got from him was routine projects, routine maintenance. Yes, there are some sums there, but we seem to just be doing the same thing. We put a little bit more into it, clearing of canals, etc. But that is routine to me. We still have it's the old Dutch system, and from whatever century back. So I think a broader or a more in-depth look needs to happen in the area of drainage, because that obviously affects the production of a lot of the food items that we see are skyrocketing at this time.
I'm sure you admire your colleagues, your parliamentarians, who sat through 5 hours and 5.5 hours.
Great feat of endurance.
Well, it also shows the power of coconut water. I think the Minister of Finance, all he had in that presentation was coconut water.
Wow.
No bathroom break or anything like that. That was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But tell me something. In all of this, what kind of, as Sharon said, it's the first all budget
Yeah.
we've had. Did you see anything different from this year, from last year and the year before, about other than the size of the budget? What struck you? Okay, we're doing something different. We're adapting to a new environment and a new situation. What did you notice?
That is the problem. There is a total absence in my view. I read the entire budget. It's a 5-hour presentation, so imagine me going through it with a fine comb teeth to try and pick up, but it's filled with a lot of political rhetoric, which I think we should, be moving away from, and just bring, certain substance to the
There
people.
was a lot of that. Every time there was an opportunity to hit the
Yes,
player,
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. It wasn't always called for.
I'm disgusted with it. You can make reference to what obtained in the past, but man, they take it to
Say it at the beginning or say it at the end, but you don't.
and then you regurgitate it. Every budget, this is the third budget, and now this is the biggest budget. You had a clear opportunity to bring different programs that we could not have afforded in the past. Elsa mentioned raise the threshold. Let's go. My party suggested 125,000 to capture broader. The minimum amount a public servant gets is about $74,000.
Yeah.
Means that they are on the lower bracket, but it doesn't mean that persons that are from there to $100,000 are well off. $100,000 is nothing in this country, given the inflation and everything that's
Well,
happening.
I think the AFC leader, Kamal Jamdatan,
Yes, he
in his presentation
pushed for
reported
100,000.
because he said there was some basket of expenditure for a normal family,
Yes,
2 adults, 2 children,
yes.
$130,000.
When we worked it out, we look at rent, different bills that you have to pay. We worked it out, and we said, our party said, as part of the coalition, said $125,000.
Yeah.
And we were very disappointed when we saw that they moved it. We're happy that you move it. Once you move it, we're happy. But to the extent that these persons will only get $2,800.
It's like, imagine the minimum.
That is the reality.
Tax saving, yes.
That is the reality.
Yeah.
And the minister goes on to speak about, more disposable income. What he does is, he likes to do it. You get, for example, in the case of the pensioners, you get $3,000, and then you say, 2.8 billion disposable income in the pockets. They're trying to hoodwink the people that don't understand budget and finance. People say, that is a huge sum. But in reality, what does
Measured against the 500 and $52
Yes, you must
billion
take it-
budget.
you must take
$2
it
billion
in
is
that-
next to nothing.
You must take it in that context that,
No.
you know.
But interesting you mentioned that, because Ramjatan's basket did not have any savings or anything like, and it did come up to $113,000.
So
No, but
you still live, sorry, but you still living from paycheck to paycheck
That's
in that
correct,
yeah.
case.
But on that same score, Sherwin will obviously want to take a political position, and it seems to be reasonable that you would want as people to get a living wage. If it had gone up to $125,000 per, what impact could it have had on inflation? Would it not have been inflationary?
Sure. Well, I want to start by mentioning the fact that so as far as Sharon is alluding to, he's getting back again to the fact that those at the bottom end are really feeling the squeeze. What we are really recognizing is once you're going to have a budget that is that much bigger, no matter how you spend, or almost no matter how you spend such a substantially larger budget, you're going to generate inflationary pressures.
Well, it does depend on how much is spent in the domestic economy,
Yeah, of
as
course,
opposed to how
of
much is
course.
spent in the.
I mean, there are some circumstances where you would not generate as much, but it seems that there will be, and again, remember this is a increase year over year, which is much sharper than the usual increase. So that raises already in an inflationary environment the specter of inflation.
Yes.
What we're saying though is, we recognize that some people are uniquely vulnerable because they don't have ways to cushion themselves. So the government must be aware of that and provide that
Well,
cushion.
most working, either the working poor or the non-working, they don't have, and you're talking about over half your population here.
Yeah.
What you can have in a situation like this, and you know, I was hearing Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan in the United Nations General Assembly, and that was a brilliant presentation when he was talking about the economy and his business. But you know, the PNC did it, the APNU did it, the PPP did it. None of the budgets since 1992 really prioritized the poor. Is that an indictment of all the political parties and the political system we have? I'm pretty sure when this is not this program talks
Yes,
frankly.
I understand and respect your frankness, and I think that as a political party, we have to accept where we would have made mistakes in the past and learn from them. You know, if you continue to repeat the same mistake, there's a saying about that. But in 2022, we are this new leadership of the PNC, and we are part of the coalition. We are looking to be very much pro-poor, looking to assist the vulnerable. That is the direction that we are taking, and so that is why we put out. Well, of course, I must say first and foremost that the government failed to consult with us. And we
As
are
required by law, as required by the Constitution.
yes, exactly.
Could you then say that the consultation takes place in Parliament as far as the political parties are concerned? But consultations are just before, not.
Yes,
Indeed. Not on the day of.
you know, and it should be meaningful.
Yes.
It should be meaningful, right? And so a PNC and by extension the coalition at this point in 2022 is pro-poor, focused on assisting the vulnerable. When we consider a single parent, and these are some of the problems that we have that generate other problems, you know, in our society, like crime, and so there are other spin-offs to this because there's always a link with poverty and crime.
Yeah.
And when you look at a single parent who might have 2 or 3 children, then you have to consider other than just the normal expenses. You got to deal with where to leave this child, daycare, and you know there are a host of issues there that you got to deal with. So you in our society you have to focus on the single parent. You know, that is one of the areas, and I can tell you what we did, I can't say we because I wasn't a government officer, but my party, and by extension the coalition, we were looking at these family care centers for example, to assist these poor, single parents, and so that they can have somewhere where, at a minimal cost, you can have your children stay and, in a safe environment and that kind of thing. But we are not seeing, at least I have not seen, any such initiative in this budget. There isn't that kind of focus to eradicate poverty and to tackle some of the social problems that we have in our society. Rather, you see what you see in the budget, and the capital explains it. A lot of money into big infrastructure. A lot of money into big
One of the things we
infrastructure.
have to do is,
Economists call it prestige or vanity project.
yeah.
And you know where does end up? With lots of elephants around the
Exactly.
place. White elephants.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
Well, one of the things I think we have to do as well is, in terms of addressing poverty, we kind of have to contextualize the situation. And given that we're in a country which is growing at the fastest rate in the world this year, before the last it was the fastest as well, and last year it was one of the fastest. The economy will have more than doubled in just such a short period of time. It really gives you a sense that
We got to be careful about talking about the economy. You talk about poor people out there who catch it.
well, I'm making that point. which
Okay,
is
go
to
on,
say
go
that
on.
the economy is growing fast, but inequality is growing faster than
The
that.
statistical economy is growing fast.
Yes.
The statistical
But
economy.
the inequality
Economy,
in
the money
country is
gone.
out of hand.
Look,
Yeah.
It's
a
on
big
paper.
part of this budget
Yeah.
is the oil.
Yeah.
And Exxon share of the oil, Hess share of the oil, CNAP next in of the oil. That doesn't come in. Why are we counting it as though it's somehow will get economy grow?
That
Well,
is why, sorry,
yeah, sure.
that is why,
You the MP, you got the preference.
if you talk to the ordinary people on the road, they're not feeling it. So they're projecting 47.5% for
growth.
growth 2022. But you go and ask the common man out there, they're not feeling it. They're numb to it. They're not feeling that. So you're absolutely correct in what you're saying.
47.5%.
Yeah, massive.
growth. And for us, even that public service 7%, it's not going to cut with this inflation rate as it's going to be.
Yeah, but it's beyond belief.
The government used to boast about 3.5% and even 2.8 and 9. Now they say last year it's 19.9, I think.
Yes.
19.9, and now we're moving for the 7.5. But Guyanese generally are not seeing it, are not feeling it rather.
Yeah.
So it's statistical, it's not real, That is how I see it. And another point I wanted to make is that they keep exaggerating about jobs. I see they're exaggerating because in the budget, you don't see any numbers. You don't really see numbers, except I saw 500. That's the only number I saw, where they identified that they would expand this CSO program. But I don't consider that as real job. CSO program pays what? $30,000. It's a stipend. It's an embarrassment. How could you come and say you created 5,000 jobs? $30,000 stipend? Come on, man.
500, you said.
With the biggest oil budget?
With the biggest, and this fantastic, and yet we have for last year, we had an overall fiscal deficit of $133 billion, and this year we're going to have a fiscal deficit of $110 billion again. This is very unusual in an oil economy. You have had $126 million, and I'm sure billion dollars, I'm sure you're going to talk about that, in oil money coming in, and yet you have a fiscal deficit of $110 billion.
Yeah, well, as an economy grows, it's not uncommon to see the debt grow. The question really is,
No,
how
I'm
are you
talking
growing
fiscal
the debt?
deficit.
Yeah, well, that will be funded by debt.
No, but why can't an economy grow
Yeah.
by revenue exceeding expenditure?
Well, what I would say is, as an economy gets bigger, it's anticipated that you'll see larger levels of debt. Let me frame it that way. what the question really
I
is,
don't
though,
quite agree, but go on.
is the capacity of the economy to host debt.
No,
is
but what I
Yeah.
meant, Elson,
Yeah.
you can have a big economy, it
Yeah.
is growing, but you are saving out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're spending. Big does not mean spend.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get into the minutiae of it. The economists don't always recommend.
That's not minutiae. I'm talking broad concept.
Economists don't always recommend that a government have a saving mindset for specific reasons. I think that's besides the point. What I think is really important is that the way that we're using the money, and the reason that we're not seeing where exactly this oil money is going, is because there isn't the sort of tangible, long-term, structured plan as to how we're going to spend monies. And so when we see an accumulation of debt, it creates a feeling of panic as to where is this money being spent. And I think that is what a lot of people are feeling right now, of confusion, panic, worry. And when you look at things like the gas to shore project, which seems to change its shape every other morning,
And money.
and the totals are going through the roof, people are starting to get nightmares about Amalia all over again. You know, that is where the concerns really are, which is to say, you're spending, but how are you spending? Will we be able to account for the spending? And what will actually be the benefit? Because when we look at the infrastructure projects that Guyana has had over the years, from Skeldon to Amalia and so on, we don't have a good record of having successful projects that are managed well, the costs are kept in check and so on. In fact, we have the opposite.
I want to go back on the point that you made, and I will tell you this. I believe it was in 2016. We did not borrow $1. I believe it was 2016, if I
Yeah, I don't have those statistics.
if I can remember correctly. No, I remember discussing it with the then finance minister. He would tell you in 2016 we didn't spend $1. We didn't borrow rather $1 from any agency. So it can be done, and we boasted about continuous growth right through those years. So definitely it can be done, and especially in the context of oil now, with the vast amount of monies coming in, I don't see why we need to still be increasing our debt. You rightly said they had it's $100 and something billion, I think.
Which one are you talking about? Deficit or the money from the
deficit?
The deficit in 2021, 133 billion, and in 2022 is projected to be $110 billion. And you know, when you get your supplementary, which seems to be part of the standard.
I was going to that. I told someone that this is not the end of it.
Not the end, not
Based
the
on the track record of this administration, I expect at least 2 or 3 supplementals.
We blink twice and another supplementary is placed.
And Gaisuku, for example, there is a provision for $6 billion. In my view, I don't think that $6 billion
not the end of the road.
Is the end of the road there. They will come back, I guarantee you, they will come back for another few billions of dollars. So, that is the trend of the current administration.
But this whole question, and that's was talking about what you expect in this so-called growing economy. There is no reason to say that oil around $90 today cannot be $60 by the end of this year.
Quite correct.
And what happens then? What happens then?
Quite correct.
Because if you don't have savings in your natural resource fund or in some other place,
you're in trouble.
It means you are in big trouble. You cannot cut back on expenditure. It's like an animal that you allow out.
And that is why that reinforces the point that we need to be putting, spending a lot in agriculture and boosting up these other industries that we have that can carry us without oil, that have been carrying us from since independence to now.
I think you also lean into another area here, which is that when you look at this NRF Act that they've put in place, it has stripped a lot of the protections that would have considered the same questions you're asking. I like to say from the beginning of time, countries with oil have always thought these 3 things. None of the 3 things are true. Oil will never run out, the price will never drop, and we can always cut back expenditures. These things are not true. It's very difficult to do that.
I hope it's not the economist said those things.
But that seems to be the narrative. That seems to be the narrative. The point being, though, that the reason that the NRF Act that the coalition put in place was so robust in its controls, gave so much emphasis to civil society to actually look at how oil money is being spent, is because it was cognizant of the risks that are associated with oil and the spending of oil money. And I think you're pointing to one, which is if the price drops. And so that's why there was a macroeconomic committee, that's why there's a public oversight and accountability committee. But of course those things have been stripped from the legislation in almost every regard. And so we're left vulnerable to these risks that are real risks and that have affected countries such as Venezuela, right next door, in ways that have destroyed their economies.
There is, well, let's talk about the budget measures. We've gone about half an hour, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
The budget measures. I have the benefit of the budget measures in this publication, prepared by Raman Mukherjee. So it was one of the striking things how few budget measures we really had, especially when it comes to fiscal measures, whether savings, whether taxes, or reduction. Now, it seems to me, and again I come back to this mantra that we have to keep lowering taxes. If you want additional benefits, taxes are part of the cost of civilization, part of the cost of security, part of the cost of running the state.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet you have greedy businessmen. I have said, if taxes were zero in this country, you would have some businessmen who would call for savings because they will say they want tax credit. So it's not as absurd as it sounds.
Well,
Now, so we had the removal of these vehicles, double cabin and crane.
Trucks and so on.
Very small person comes into this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is why we keep saying that a lot of the measures that you always see it with them. It's like, look, I remember last year you had a decrease on water, I think, and it was what, $100 or something like
minuscule.
that. But it could benefit the bigger businesses,
That's
very
correct.
large organizations. They are the ones that will benefit from those measures. So we're not surprised by this type of measure again here, because who are the ones that would be purchasing these pickups, these big pickups? They're the rich.
I would also say that the measures to help those most vulnerable that you see in this budget, those measures largely we could have had with or without oil. Oil is not really even connected to those measures.
Well,
But when it comes to a lot of these tax initiatives and so on that they're looking at, the argument is that it will lower costs, but we've seen in the last year them try initiatives and we haven't really seen substantial lower in costs. And we've seen inflation continue to go.
No.
So it's not necessarily that these measures will even be effective. We'll have to wait to even see if they're useful measures.
well, some of these measures can be counterproductive because lots of them are gas guzzlers.
Yeah.
So you end up paying more. That's what it's going to do.
Yeah.
And who benefits? Now you've got this massive expenditure on contracts, and you're removing the 2% withholding tax on resident contractors.
I think a lot of how do I put it? But contracts and infrastructure, these big projects are where you're gonna find the corruption. So I see that, I can easily link that to what they're trying to achieve. What they're trying to achieve there. I believe the 2% went on was applied to contractors for sums greater than
$500,000 per annum. Yeah.
So in no way that affected the poor. What I would say, the poor contractors, the carpenters, and the ordinary people. But again, they are bringing relief. The reliefs that they are talking about are for the big boys.
But
they're not targeting the poorer class of people. Clearly, when you look at every single measure there, most measures in the budget, it's targeting a higher bracket of people rather than you target the low end Chinese.
Yeah, it raises the question again of inequality.
well, does anybody care about inequality?
Well, I would argue that the people who are punishing to buy plantain care very much about not being able to get their fair
you see,
share.
part of the problem with our society, and here again, the politicians, opposition parties, the trade unionists are jokes in this country, or jokers. What has the trade union movement done for workers in this country for the past year? You've got a useless trade union leadership in this country. They actually work against the interests of their own members. But we're talking about this 2% withholding tax. Look, I happen to be an accountant. This 2% withholding tax is not a final tax. It's simply a tax on in advance.
Yeah.
And what it did, it allowed the Guyana Revenue Authority to track persons. Of course, a lot of people don't even report it.
Yeah.
Because if you build in a house, you don't bother with. But
Yeah.
because the man may fair play, may take in your house if you want deduct tax of me, and me pay NIS. But this is not a final tax. Moreover, they will be self-employed persons, and in any case, so to tear the nonsense about cash flow can only make the informed person wonder if those people know what they're saying, because in any case you pay 4 quarterly installments of taxes.
Yeah.
So where is this, how is this thing affecting cash flow? And then we have the freight cost adjustment. That was a measure because of the supply constraints we had with I don't think anybody could quarrel with that. Establishment of farmers markets.
The freight. Well, again, I would hope that it could trickle down. The relief could trickle down to the ordinary person. In many instances, it don't. So that is our hope. We looked at it, but that is what I would say on it.
And if there could be some sort of an evaluation, because that was in place last year, as to the
Yes, this one here is a continuation.
Exactly. And it's
It
costly.
was
It's
amended at
levels.
December 31,
Yes.
and it's gone towards December 2022.
Yeah. So it's a costly measure as well. I believe it's $6 billion of foregone revenue. But the point being that we need to evaluate this because we saw inflation persist. So the question is, were these types of policies effective? And if they weren't effective, what other measures are being put in place to cushion the effect on the average consumer?
The next budget measure is one that I have a significant problem with. An allocation of $5 billion for possible assistance to the most vulnerable to cushion the impact of cost of living. That's a blank check.
Yeah, that's very ambiguous.
No, but no. The thing about this is that the law, the Constitution provides a contingency fund.
Sure.
So if you have an urgent, unavoidable situation,
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
I hope you guys, and I'll hold you responsible, Shavin, if you support this. This is, you're opening a Pandora's box to support this. I think it violates the Constitution. I believe Raman Mukherjee said something to that effect. This request by the government has dangers and certainly violates the spirit, if not the letter of the provisions of the Constitution on spending.
The PPP, this administration, I would say, is has no regard for the Constitution, has no regard for what the law says. We saw in December, I think it was December, yes, when they had the handout of $250,000,
Yeah.
which wasn't
Severance,
a
wasn't
budget.
severance.
It wasn't severance. They tried to put it as severance, but it wasn't
Those
severance.
people have already
It
been
wasn't
paid severance.
Exactly.
It wasn't catered for in the
That's correct.
2021 budget.
Yeah.
But here again, so I am not surprised with that, but we will have to vigorously oppose it.
And what do you mean by vigorously oppose it?
Well, we may possibly have to go to the courts. We may possibly have to go to the courts
Because
with some of the things that we find in the budget there, and these type of violations. I know that we have some group of persons looking at some of these measures at the moment. So it is my hope that we can bring some kind of action
You know,
to stop it.
one of the things about our constitution is premised on the rule of law. And I mean, the very constitution that says that we want the rule of law, meaning that everybody is equal, everybody conforms to the law. If you're a Boris Johnson, the Metropolitan Police can still,
Yeah.
Scotland Yard can
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
come and investigate if you have a party in your private home.
Yep.
And we have violations of this nature, and the opposition is not doing anything about it.
As I said, we have to take a stand. We are looking at it, and it is my hope that long before these debates are over, we can bring some kind of action to deal with this.
Let's look at a couple of the other measures. Support to dialysis patients of up to $600,000 per annum.
No particular qualms with that, just so long as that money is properly dealt with, because unfortunately we have programs that would be for X, Y, and Z, but the money isn't properly dealt with.
But let me ask you this. Was that, I mean, you and the state should look out, part of the reason a civilized state look
Yeah.
after the people who can't look after themselves. Why don't we try to make our hospitals, provide hospitals to provide these facilities? Because you know what's going to happen? You go to those, somebody going to start setting up a dialysis facility straight away,
Yeah,
straight away.
Yeah.
And you know who is going to benefit? The business class again.
yeah. I totally agree with you. We should improve those medical institutions to deal with these kind of problems, rather than you providing money now for somebody to just come and
Yeah.
uplift $600,000 and
Yeah, over the medium to long term, we really should improve the broad capabilities. That's included as well in the capabilities of the health sector. But I do have some sympathy in knowing some people who have difficulty with dialysis.
Nobody could.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Is how you make it in a way that people cannot exploit it.
yes.
That's the problem we're talking about.
And it would have been an excellent measure for this force oil budget to, they have
Improve the
certain
health sector, care and
hospitals
so on.
that will deal with these kind of problems.
But in fairness to the budget, one can accuse them of being over ambitious to build 6 hospitals in a year. Because look, it's easy to build buildings. What you're going to do when the nurses coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
There needs
These
to be
underpaid nurses.
a broader plan. I am told that Georgetown Hospital, for example, would have lost over 100 nurses in the last year. And so you're spot on with what you're saying. I've seen this is not new what you're saying, it's just amplified. In the 2020 budget, if we go back to the 2020 budget, you would see them boasting about a number of infrastructure projects and allocating some small amounts to kickstart it. But then to now, nothing has happened. I remember the sports facility in Region 2. The sports minister boasted about that. If you go to the ground, not a load of sand, nothing has been done there. We're talking 2020, we are now in 2022. So that's not something that is new that's coming from the government. lots of exaggeration. I heard about some road expansion, I believe in Region 3, or a new highway. There's mention of that going to Perica and some other expansion on the East Coast. To me, that is more long term. That is not something that will happen in the immediate future.
I take it you all won't have a problem with the increase, maybe with the amount, in the uniform grant per child from 4,000 to 5,000.
I don't really have a problem with it. It means that they're getting a little bit more, but again, in the context of oil, I still believe that much more could have been put in terms of the substantive amount.
What about the increase from $15,000 to $25,000 per child in the Because We Care cash grants?
One of the things that I think is important with these Because We Care cash grants, because they do come off a bit, and I think this is really the intention by the PVP as just kind of a give you money, see if you feel better, is that it needs to, whenever we're doing these types of cash grants, we need to have specific metrics in mind and specific things that we want to achieve, such as 100% attendance in schools or 90% attendance in schools. These are important metrics, and other countries have done a good job of tying these types of initiatives to those types of metrics. It could also be things like visits to clinics and so on. I think PVP is concerned mostly with just giving out money to try and get some votes and not thinking through.
I want to agree with Elson there, because there must be a purpose other than just handing out money. Now, if you look at the pass rates, when you look at the national grade 6, how many students write national grade 6, and you compare it with the CXC and the pass rates there, and how many actually write CX, if you follow it, you would get a sense that there are hundreds or thousands that fall out somewhere through the crack there. And then there are those that get the 5 subjects, but they don't get math and English. So there should be a focus on mathematics and on English, but we are not seeing those types of programs in this budget. We had the night school, for whatever reason persons drop out or they fail to acquire a level of performance, they could have gone back to school. They're trying to, I'm convinced that they're trying to end their night school rather than expand that kind of program, So,
and those are precisely the types of programs that really are necessary in an oil economy, because now we're going to have a lot of higher paying jobs and so on coming into the country. But if you don't have citizens who have had the opportunity to qualify themselves to meet this demand, then what are you looking to do? Import all the labor and leave Guyanese kind of at the bottom rung? I think it's really the opposite of how things should be approached, and we need to have much more of an emphasis on building out these types of skills.
Let's turn to an economic issue. It is an unfortunate reality among oil producing countries in the third world to suffer from that thing called the resource curse, which essentially means those countries that got rich in resources, generally the people are poor, the governance is poor, and serious issues. There is also the question of the Dutch disease, which well, you say what the Dutch disease is.
Yeah, well, essentially that's just where an increasing dependence on the oil and gas industry kind of moves your resources away from other industries, and you end up totally dependent upon oil and gas and so on. And that, of course, is, you don't want to be totally dependent on anything, much less something as volatile as oil and gas industry.
And that's what it is. It's the money coming in, the sudden splurge of money. Everybody thinking about oil and gas. I don't know if you realize the budget, the economic statistics show that petroleum now makes up from almost zero from 0 2 years ago, it makes up 35% of the Ghana economy. 35%. Now, what happens if if oil price was to go back to where it was 2 years ago?
Yeah, you even had negative prices in the heart of the pandemic.
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
short
that's
period
right.
of time, you know, it
Because of the
was
shipping
incredibly
costs
low.
and so on.
Yeah, it was incredibly low. But what the point being that oil is a tricky friend. You know, he's not the most trustworthy of friends. So you have to really ensure that you diversify your economy so that you have a cushion. But also, and this again ties back to the Natural Resources Fund Act that the coalition put in place, where you had both a public accountability and oversight committee and an economic committee that were looking at these types of issues to mitigate them. Those measures have been removed by the PPP, so we're vulnerable to these types of really concerning phenomenon.
But is that where the Natural Resource Fund also comes in? Because it provides a bit of a stability. It's a stabilization fund as well.
Oh, well, that depends on how it is used, unfortunately.
No,
If you're withdrawing everything, then it's not going to be stable.
if you had the Winston Jordan type
Yeah.
of mechanism,
Yeah,
the 2019 mechanism,
Yeah.
where you look at all those variables,
Exactly,
including what's happening with inflation,
That's how it needed to
what's
happen.
happening with your exchange rate.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
how it needed
yeah,
to be done.
yeah.
You know, and it's unfortunate that PPP has decided to go down the path of, you know, that other countries have unfortunately gone. People don't necessarily know, but Venezuela had an attempt at a sovereign wealth fund, and that was not a serious sovereign wealth fund. It's sad that we're heading in the direction of that. Those mechanisms put in place, especially with regard to civil society, you know, the Chartered Accountants Association, I believe, was there, Bar Association, Transparency International, and the mandate of them was a broad mandate to look at how our revenues were being used. It is important to have not just the government's voices in your legislation, but to have a nice broad cross-section of society, even some people from the opposition who are supposed to be involved in that process.
Well,
it's for a reason that those things were put in place. It's sad that they've been stripped, and we must now deal with the consequences of that.
Well, Elsa, I want to stick on this question
Yeah.
of this Dutch disease.
Yeah.
One of the consequences as well
Sure.
is your exchange rate appreciates. Now, it's easy to think that if I can buy a US dollar for 200 on Guyana rather than 215, are good. But what are some of the dangers we have?
Yeah, one of the main danger that economists would think about is it's much more expensive for you to export if your exchange rate appreciates in the way we're talking about. Because now something costed, let's say, $1 US from someone in the States that's wanting to buy it, you know, maybe now it will cost $1.50 and then eventually $2. That will reduce their willingness to buy your goods that you're exporting. And the only good that people will continue to want to buy from you is your oil. So you end up totally dependent upon this oil and not having other areas. This is one of the reasons that Venezuela actually imported the majority of their food from Mexico during their crisis, is that they had killed out a lot of the other industries by only focusing on oil. And so we're, you know, again at risk of the exchange rate substantially changing. But I think even in more tangible ways, you can already see the effect of Dutch disease and how we need to really focus on it. Now, when you look at the fisheries sector, you're seeing low catches. Fishermen complain they've been pushed off of the areas that they would normally fish. That's why the
Big
catches are so low.
man, the minister reported
Yeah.
there was an 11% growth.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, come in, Joe.
It was shocking to
Yeah.
me because, to my mind, the reality on the ground, and I have spoken with
Yeah.
fisher folk
The price doubled for fish.
all across this country. I've spoken with
Yeah.
popular from big to small persons
Yeah.
in the fishing industry,
Yeah.
and the talk is the same. Now I was
Yeah.
shocked. I was shocked.
Yeah.
You know, I questioned
Yeah.
the budget. I questioned those figures.
When they say that, you know, when they say fish doesn't smell good, that number doesn't smell right. Something is wrong with that.
Something smells
How can
fishy
the
here.
fishermen complain so bitterly about low catches? How can prices double? People complain about the prices doubling, and you have an increased catch. These things don't add up.
Well, you know, one of the very practical ways, I unfortunately I do talk too much and play talk, but somehow I feel that I have to supplement some of the discussions. One of the serious problems of the Dutch disease,
Sure.
as you were saying, is if this happens, then what happens? How are you going to sell your rice abroad?
Yep.
How are you going to sell your greens?
Yeah.
How are you going to sell
Yeah.
whatever fish you got? How you going to sell sugar? Now, when you have your costs in domestic currency, which is appreciating, and your revenue is in foreign currency, which is depreciating, it's a double whammy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could imagine, non-Passat could have serious problem with your rice
Yeah.
export, hacking all of them. And you know, Raman McRae said in this budget focus that it's a pity, we regret that we didn't hear more from the minister as to what they will do to stem the effects of the Dutch disease. We already have it on the Lower East Bank, them all, and you know you're going to get gentrification, people going to get pushed out of their homes
Yeah,
and so on.
yeah.
Yeah.
We will have serious consequences. I don't think that came through the budget.
Well,
now
yeah,
we
yeah.
got to. Sorry,
Well, I
want
can-
to go on to another thing.
I can be very specific on this particular note. The way that you're one of the only ways that you can really keep that export industry alive is you have to increase the productivity so you can bring down your costs. And you know, if you look at Germany, they have a strong dollar, but they're very productive. They have a high level of productivity. That's the
But they don't have the
emphasis.
Dutch disease.
Well, what I'm saying is they have a strong dollar. So, well, they're marketing it. But anyway, the point being that once you have high levels of productivity, you can fight it off. But that is not necessarily what we're seeing. What we're seeing is an emphasis on more production, but not necessarily more productivity or more efficient ways of producing.
And
That's what we have to do.
35% of the economy. And don't forget, next couple of years we doubling our oil production. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
35% already. That's serious. I want to raise this issue. The Natural Resource Fund. $126 billion brought into the budget. Even and you know it is the main part of the increase.
Yeah.
I believe that the way it has been presented in the national estimates have some issues. What is the parliamentary opposition? But what is their position in relation to the Natural Resource Fund?
Well, from the inset, you know, we protested the bill that they brought because first off, it removed a number of the guardrails from the 2019 bill. So that is the first position that I want to state. But looking specifically at what they have done here, in that act, it says in no uncertain terms that it details how the money is supposed to be spent on priorities. Priorities, I can tell you,
Development priority, not just any priority.
national development priorities, including any initiative aimed at realizing an inclusive green economy and essential projects to
Related to the effect of making
Yes,
that.
yeah.
So you have to discount that one.
Yes.
Now, do you see in the budget anywhere where this section of the Natural Resource Fund Act is complied with?
Nowhere in the budget, and that is our problem with it. The act is very, very specific. You're supposed to state, we're supposed to know exactly if you're gonna invest in this, you're gonna invest our money on this project, this bottle as a project. We're supposed to know everything about it, and then we approve it. But it cannot be lumped with all the other.
Which is called budget support.
Yeah,
budget support.
It cannot be, and I think that we would have to challenge it in the courts. I believe that we would have to challenge it in the courts.
Well, you're chairman of the party.
We have a team looking at it at the present moment. I hope that I can make a better statement as of tomorrow. I am hoping that I can make a better statement on it, but that is where we are. We do not agree with it. We think it violates the act, it violates the law, and it must be challenged.
Interestingly enough, now, Anand Gulsaran, former Auditor General, goes further than I do. His view is that that should have been brought as a prior matter before being incorporated into the budget. My view is that it should be supported by a separate statement in the budget.
No, I definitely understand where he's coming from. And what I think is important for your viewers to grasp is this. Just because you can spend all the money doesn't mean you should spend all the money. Right? Just because you can spend 75% doesn't mean you should spend 75%. It is something that needs to be ventilated in Parliament. You need to have a proper discussion about that in Parliament. You need to have even clarification as to the difference between a development goal and a development priority, because we have a wide range of goals. What are the priorities? Right?
Yeah.
And we need to ensure that the actual number that is withdrawn is the number that we agree is the appropriate number, not just as much as you could spend. And that, unfortunately, is the approach that we're seeing right now.
I am not the economist or a lawyer, but I gather from this
The excellent vote was
but my thing is that our point is that we're supposed to know specifically what this money, these monies are going to be
that's why it's
spent
such a
on.
unique thing. That's why it requires
And
separation from your
this
finances.
cannot be acceptable. This cannot be acceptable. And we will have to challenge it.
Well, so overall, do you think the opposition should support this budget?
I think that the opposition has raised some serious questions, and I think that as a result, there's not going to be that type of support to it. I think it really concerns us, and that the vulnerable are not being dealt with. That there doesn't seem to be a strong national plan as to how we're going to use our monies, and there isn't that level of accountability. So I think overall the budget really is a failure. It's big and loud, but more isn't always better. It's how you use the money, and especially if you're going to make the more vulnerable people have a more difficult life in the next year, that is the opposite of a good budget.
Well, Mr. PNCR Chairman, you have the last 30 seconds.
Practically, you can do more with less money. In life, you can do more with less money. So I am not impressed by this $500+ billion budget. I think it's anti-poor. It goes against the fundamentals of providing the kind of relief for the poor and the vulnerable. And so we are disappointed. I can say we are very much disappointed. We are disappointed that the government did not consult with half of this nation. That's first and foremost that what they should have done, because we're representing essentially half of the country, and so they should have consulted. We're in the time of oil, and we got to ease down this hostility and this kind of political back and forth, and reach at the table in the interest of all Guyanese. So that is what I would want to leave here. I hope that the government can look back at it. We're already in the budget debates, but I hope that they can look back at some of these measures and take corrective action.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sherman Holder, Chairman of the PNCR and Member of Parliament. Mr. Elson Lowe, economist who is not a Member of Parliament. It's been interesting talking with you gentlemen. I trust that our viewers would have a better appreciation and understanding of the opportunities and challenges in the national budget, and we look forward to how it will evolve, ensuring that the budget is passed within the framework of the law and for the benefit, belatedly, perhaps, of the persons of Guyana. So, operators and viewers, thank you and good night. It's past my bedtime. I'm 9:41, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good night. Have a good week.
But with hard work and prayer, we're still standing.